Hi and welcome back to the Antiques Air Show. My name is Jared, and in this video we take a look at the aircraft in the second film in the Indiana Jones franchise, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now before we jump in, this video will solely focus on the aircraft in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I've covered Raiders of the Lost Ark in a separate video which can be found in the description below, and the other three films in the franchise will have their own individual video that will be released in the coming weeks and months, so stay tuned for those. Released in 1984, with Harrison Ford returning as title character Indiana Jones alongside actress Kate Capshaw as Willie Scott and child actor Ke Huy Quan as Short Round, Temple of Doom is in fact a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Once again directed by Steven Spielberg, upon its release it was met with mixed reviews from both audiences and critics alike, but nonetheless would still be a box office hit, becoming the highest grossing film of 1984. Now if we look at the aircraft in its film, in its nearly 2-hour long runtime, there isn't many. In fact, there is only one. But this single aircraft that does appear is quite important to the movie, bridging the opening sequence to the main plot. So with that all being said, I think it's time to roll the tapes and let's check out the single aircraft in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The movie opens up in 1935 in a Shanghai nightclub. Here we meet Indiana Jones negotiating a deal with local gangster Lao Chi. In the pursuing negotiations, Indy is poisoned, and this leads to an all-out fight between gangsters and Indy, in which he finds himself jumping out of the window of the nightclub with nightclub singer-dancer Willie Scott. Landing in a car driven by his young accomplice, Short Round, Indy and his friends are pursued through the streets of Shanghai by Lao Chi and his gangsters. Eventually they lose them and make it to the airport where they plan to escape on the next flight out, and it is here we get the look at our only aircraft in Temple of Doom, a Ford Tri-Motor. The Ford Tri-Motor story begins in the mid-1920s. During this time, a man by the name of William Bushnell Stout had begun designing aircraft and had, in 1922, created Stout Metal Company, with the Ford brothers being one of a number of early investors into the company. In 1924, Edsel Ford bought a controlling stake in the company before it became a division of the Ford Company in 1925. In 1924, Stout and Ford also built and opened Ford Airport, one of the first modern airports in America, in Dearborn, Michigan, and a factory for the Stout Metal Airplane Company was erected on site in 1926. Stout had been experimenting with aircraft made of corrugated aluminium, and by the time his company had become part of the Ford Company, he had turned one of his designs into a tri-motor designated 3AT and powered by Curtiss Wright air-cooled radial engines. Supposedly this design wasn't terrific, with issues with airflow patterns, and it ended up being destroyed in a mysterious fire in January 1926 after only making a handful of flights. Following on from the 3AT, the 4AT emerged, and this would prove to be the first variant of the classic Ford Tri-Motor that would become hugely popular. The design was very different from the 3AT, and performance was significantly improved. In fact, the whole aircraft had been more or less redesigned without Stout. Engines utilized were the Wright Whirlwind. It had a crew of 3 and could seat about 8 passengers with a lavatory on board. It was designed as a passenger aircraft, however it could also take mail, and it also bore a close resemblance to the Fokker Tri-Motors then being produced in Europe. Although Ford's example was an all-metal design using lightweight and extremely strong beryllium. Following on from the 4AT was the more refined 5AT variant introduced in 1928. The 5AT variant was powered by the new Pratt & Whitney 420 horsepower Wasp engine, and some versions expanded passenger capacity up to 15. Extra carrying capacity was added through placing cargo holds in the center section of the inner wing. Following the 5AT, there was the 6 through to 14AT. However, these were all mainly built as either one-offs or in very small production numbers, or some were not even built at all, just staying on the drawing board. These included the one-off prototype 8AT designed to carry cargo, and redesigned to only have a single engine, and the 14AT that was built but never flown. The Ford Trimotor, also known as the Tin Goose, would become quite a popular aircraft and help transform commercial aviation. Throughout the 1920s, aviation had developed a reputation for itself as being dangerous and unsafe, and this was something Henry Ford had set out to change with the Ford Trimotor. He proclaimed to the world that the Ford Trimotor was, quote, the safest airliner around, end quote. It was considered a stable aircraft, able to fly well on two engines and maintain altitude on a single engine. The aircraft that was used in the Temple of Doom was involved in one incident in 1956 where an engine fell off mid-flight and still the aircraft was able to land safely. The Ford Trimotor was easy to maintain and rather rugged, making it popular with airlines. By 1929, nearly all US major airlines had Ford Trimotors in operations, and it is said that more than 100 airlines utilized Trimotors at some point. It is a reasonable conclusion to make that the Ford Trimotor began to make commercial flying attractive and make it look safe to the general public. The Ford Trimotors would also be involved in a number of special flights. Firstly, between November 28th to 29th, 1929, a Ford Trimotor was the first aircraft to fly over the South Pole. Then on the 18th of February 1930, it became the first type of aircraft to fly a cow when Elm Farm Ollie was flown between Bismarck, Missouri and St. Louis, Missouri. It was also milked mid-flight, marking the first cow to be milked during a flight. Pan American Airways would also operate a Ford Trimotor on its first scheduled international flight between Key West, Florida and Havana, Cuba. Production would ultimately end in 1933 with some 199 examples being produced. However, by 1933, things had come to a crawl with only 2 Trimotors being bought that year. For comparison, its peak year of sales was 1929, with 86 examples being produced throughout the year. The military also utilized the type, with the United States Navy and Marine Corps operating a number of different variants. With the Navy, the Ford Trimotor was designated RR2 through to RR5, while the US Army Air Corps utilized a mixture known as C3s, C3A, C4, C4As, and C9s. Ultimately though, the quick advance in aviation technology, with newer and better airliners such as the Boeing 247 appearing in the early 30s, meant that the Ford Trimotor was made obsolete. Still though, some did operate until the 1960s. Today, there are about 18 left in the world, with at least 8 of these being airworthy. Indy, Willie and Short Round board the plane, ready to make their escape. As Indy walks into the plane, Lao Chi turns up and Indy has a satisfying action of shouting goodbye and slamming the door shut.
Nice try, Lao Chi!
Little does he know though, the aircraft is actually owned by Lao Chi. From here we get a shot of the aircraft taking off into the sunset, an inside shot of the fuselage as Indy falls asleep, and the typical map montage that we see in all Indy movies when he is travelling. As the plane makes its way west, it ends up in high mountains. Here, under the instruction of Lao Chi, the pilots decide to dump the fuel and bail out, leaving Indy and his friends to crash into the mountains. Here we get some more interior shots of the aircraft, and then as Indy, Willie and Short Round wake up to find no pilots, a shot of the cockpit. Indy jumps into the pilot's seat, trying to figure out what has occurred. There are some shots of the instrument panel, and then shots of both engines as they conk out of gas, and Indy realizes what is happening. With the engine sputtering, Short Round makes the declaration. With the aircraft coming perilously close to the ground, Indy makes the decision for the group to bail out in an inflatable life raft. And just after they've left the aircraft, the plane goes crashing into the side of the mountains. With the crash of the Ford Trimotor into the mountainside, not another aircraft is seen in the rest of the Temple of Doom. To achieve various shots, an actual flying example of the Ford Trimotor was attained, this being a 5ATB variant. This was utilised alongside several models and a mock-up of the cockpit. One model had a 3-foot wingspan, while another had a 6-foot long wingspan and was utilised for more detailed shots. and then there was a smaller one, which was fitted with pyrotechnics for the crash scene. Some of the filming with the models was done atop of the Industrial Light and Magic main stage in natural sunlight. The shot of the Ford Tri-Motor flying over the Great Wall of China was achieved through the filming of one of the model aircraft, and then combining this with the filming of a detailed model of the landmark. For the scene at Shanghai Airport, a closed Air Force base in Marin County was used. The real Ford Tri-Motor they used in the film is still on display and in airworthy condition, being a part of the Fantasy of Flight collection in Polk City, Florida. This particular aircraft was originally operated by Transcontinental Air Transport, where it had been christened City of Philadelphia. On an interesting side note, this aircraft had already seen some fame when in 1929 it featured in a newsreel film promoting the coast-to-coast in 48-hour service that Transcontinental Air Transport had begun. This was a service where passengers, utilizing a mixture of trains and Ford Tri-Motors, could travel from New York to Los Angeles in 48 hours. In the newsreel, this particular aircraft is seen landing, flying the final leg of the trip from Clovis to Los Angeles, and flying up to famous aviator Amelia Earhart. The Ford Tri-Motor seems quite an adept choice of aircraft for the film's setting, and I think fits in quite well. However, on a slight side note, when we get to Shanghai Airport in the opening sequence, we can see a Pan American Airways hangar in the background. This, I would suggest, is a little bit inaccurate for the historical period of the time, as in 1933, Pan American Airways was still trying to negotiate their way into the region, and the first crossing of the Pacific by a passenger airliner from America to Asia didn't occur until 1935. But at the end of the day, it's a minor background detail. It's being nitpicky. This film is not meant to be a historical piece. It's an action and adventure film, something it excels quite well at. So with that all being said, that brings today's video to an end. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Nice try, Lao She!
Goodbye, Dr. Jones.